This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. This episode is brought to you by the American Homebrewers Association, a community of more than 45,000 beer and brewing enthusiasts worldwide. The AHA publishes Zymergy Magazine, hosts the National Homebrew Competition and HomebrewCon, and equips members with brewing tips, proven recipes, and money-saving deals on beer, food, and brewing supplies. Founded in 1978, the AHA remains true to founder Charlie Papazian's timeless advice: relax, don't worry, have a homebrew. Celebrate beer and homebrewing with the AHA at homebrewersassociation.org.
Hey everybody, it's John Hall, senior editor of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, and I find myself in one of the hottest brewing regions of the country. If you're not already aware of the Hudson Valley, you certainly should be, especially when it comes to New York. And I'm actually close to the border of the Catskill Mountains and at Equilibrium Brewing, which is, for those of you who regularly line up for can releases or trade across the country, this is a brewery that has certainly been top of mind for you for quite some time. And in a departure from our normal format this week, it's a 2-for-1 episode. I have both of the co-founders of the brewery here with me, and I'm going to ask you guys to introduce yourselves just so people, as we're listening, can hear your voices and know who's speaking when.
Okay. So I'm Ricardo Petroni. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the brewery, and I'm dealing mostly with ground production and all the things that are necessary for getting the beer to our clients and consumers.
I'm Pete Oates. I'm the CEO and co-founder, and I invent the beers and the processes and collect the microbes that make the beers that you guys drink.
And Pete, this started because of your love of beer.
Yeah, we were doing a lot of 13-hour trips to Vermont. 13 hours in one day back and forth to get...
Were you living here?
Yeah.
Okay.
About 20 minutes north, but basically.
Okay.
And so we were going up and getting Alchemist, Hill Farmstead, Lawson's, and some other beers. And that started putting strains on my work life, my relationships. And Ricardo had the idea of like, hey, why don't you just, start brewing the beer you want to drink, and that saves you 13 hours. And that sort of evolved into his master plan of opening up a brewery himself.
When you say... brewing the beers that you like, it was obviously the hazy IPAs and some of the, were there other beers that were coming out of that area that were speaking to you?
Yeah, the way we brew it here is we kind of brew what we want to drink. And so we started with hazy IPAs because that is what we really like to drink, and also you can make them faster, which I think is important for opening a business.
Mm-hmm.
Then we had to sort of make a decision between stouts and sours, which are two of our other favorite categories. And we've put a fair amount of time and energy into developing our sour program because the women in the project said we like sours more than stouts. And that was quite simple.
Yep.
Okay.
So, we're definitely working on our dark beer program as well, but we did sours before stouts because the women said so, basically.
Where'd you get your start homebrewing? What was the path for you?
There was originally another person who was going to brew with Ricardo. I was just going to be a passive/active drinker at the brewery, and I started brewing a batch or two with him. I have a very strong science background, mm-hmm. So the water chemistry stuff is very familiar with my training. And I started seeing things, and he kind of got other plans and moved to Tennessee, and Ricardo needed someone to head up the brewing. So I started just building a system for myself out of pots and pans and just pieces I could collect to make it how I thought it made sense.
So you weren't doing something like right out of the box?
No, my pilot system I kind of built from scratch. So it was...
Yeah, it was an interesting discussion. I was surprised about that because I started homebrewing like 20 years ago. And I started like any home brewer starts, you start with like the first thing you'd have is a pot in your kitchen. The kitchen is small, and then you have like typically some extract brewing first, and then you move into grain brewing and whatnot. And I I started brewing with Pete, and Pete was like, "Yes, I'm doing this with the grain." It's like, "Are you starting full grain?" It was like the system was insane. It was better than any system I used to have, and he built it on his own. I mean, he was like,
I remember. Was it a standard 5-gallon homebrew?
It was 5-gallon, but it was
a combination electric gas.
Yeah, it was a combination because a lot of the processes are automated. I mean, we were
with reams. Yeah, it was like really.
We were up to 6 batches a day, which is a lot. Brewing 6 batches a day is pretty crazy.
And this was just for fun, or is this like in the lead up to the?
I get a little excited sometimes, and I go overboard. It's sort of my personality trait. And so once I saw that, like I could do 6 batches a day, and I had the space and the setup and 6 taps, and I wanted to try all these different experiments. That I wanted the system to be sort of semi-automated, and I could, brew a bunch of stuff in parallel at compressed time. But for that to happen, I needed a RIMS to maintain the temperature for me. It needed an electric, and so like the whole system was fairly automated and running on electric, and so that was just sort of put together because it made sense.
Okay, and this was just you.
Well, I remember the first batch I was going to do. He was like, "Here, just buy DME and boil it and try to make a beer," and I went, "No."
Yeah, and I was like, "Oh, okay." So we're starting we're blowing up 3 levels. I mean, it was clear. It was clear to me after we brewed together, kind of 3-4 times, that he was going to know a lot more about brewing than I knew already. And it was clear to me. So it's like, okay, so this is really going your way. So I was kind of more. I turned into helping mode, and I was like helping on what was going on in the brewing, and it was a lot of fun. A little intense.
What was the first beer you made? Homebrew.
EQM,
which is now
it's a very malty double IPA with a little bit of I think we used orange zest in that first one.
Orange ones, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's back when I was researching hop oils, and I was like, hops can be astringent and bitter, and they have the same oil in citrus peel, so let's throw citrus peel in there as a good source of like astringent-free hop oils.
I mean,
of course, very orangey.
Sure, but it strikes me though, if this is like the first beer that you're making right off the bat. I mean, again, it sort of flies in the face of I think what so many other homebrewers turned pro did. Where it's like, I got a Mr. Beer kit and I made an amber and it tasted terrible.
Well, they probably didn't go through a PhD program at MIT.
Okay, so I mean, there is the scientific.
Like I have a pretty extensive background of working in labs with very high-end engineering and scientific equipment. So this wasn't a big stretch for me to try to put together this electric system that steeped grain and pushed water out of grain. That was not so complicated compared to some of this stuff. I worked at Sandia National Labs for a while, where there was literally armed guys with machine guns to protect their hydrology secrets, which never made any sense to me.
Yeah.
But that was a pretty serious lab that had some pretty high-end fluid mechanics equipment.
So this is more of just a walk in the park for you then?
Yes and no. I mean, sort of one thing that I love about brewing so much is that it's really sophisticated. I mean, once you really get into the weeds and look at distributions of thousands of compounds and which one does what and how does it affect the sensory profile, it's pretty intense. I mean, this is probably a weird thing to say, but right now I'm still not 100% sure how to make a double IPA.
Okay.
And that's a weird thing to say, and I know that because we make some really good double IPAs, but things are, even here evolving day to day. It's one reason we have our research series, because we're continuing to grow, learn, and expand our process and our knowledge, and then apply that hopefully into the glass, which is, at the end of the day, does it smell good, taste good, feel good in your mouth, those kind of things.
But you're looking at it at almost the molecular level then, when you're putting these recipes together and when you're doing sensory evaluation.
I heard Sean Hill say once that brewing it's not like 50% art, 50% science. It's like I forget his numbers, so don't quote me that, but it's like 7/8 science, 1/8 art. And this is really science. It's concentrations of stuff. There's mass fluxes happening all over the place. They're changing as it evolves, and then at the end of the day, you get a concentration of stuff in your glass, and that's what you and the consumer experience. And so, how do you manipulate that to have all the flavors in the right order, the right place, and make it a beautiful beer.
I want to back up to not knowing how to make a double IPA, because I mean that sounds like I think I get what you're saying, but I'd love for you to expand upon that a little bit more, because I think people might scratch their heads when they come here and they get a double IPA from you and they enjoy drinking it.
I guess what that sort of means is that we've been constantly experimenting at the small scale, kind of behind the scenes, and figuring out some pretty cool stuff that has this really amazing flavor and aroma profile. And we haven't been 100% sure how to produce that at the large scale. I mean, we can make MC squared like we've been making MC squared, no problem. But in terms of the potential I see that what hops can do for a drinking experience, there's these really beautiful dimensions of flavor and aroma that we're just now understanding what's creating them, how to keep them in the glass, and how do you really understand and optimize that process such that you have this really beautiful, elegant, hoppy beer. And so we're literally just now, coming out with batches.
I think I will put it in a different way. I mean, I would just say that what Pete is referring to is that we don't think our double IPAs are finished. They can be improved. They can be...
Yeah, how do we make what I would call our perfect double IPA, where I eventually go, I don't know how to make this any better. So I don't think we're there. How do we make really good double IPAs? Yeah, we do that all the time.
But how do you dial it in and perfect it? I mean, I was talking to Dan Suarez not too long ago from Suarez Family Brewery, and he was saying that a recipe is actually never finished in his mind. That there's always ways of...
that's what...
I think that's correct. I know that gives you an eye twitch a little bit, but...
No, I'm happy with that. Every now and then it gets into complications.
Well, when's this beer going to be ready? I don't know. How many barrels are we getting? I don't know.
So, and that's got to be the difference between the art and science, and then adding in the business as well, because it is a numbers game. And you guys are here in this fairly large warehouse. You guys are building out a tap room right now. I mean, there's financial considerations. Like you go from being a home brewer where even if you're brewing 6 times a day, which is I'm glad you admit that's the first step of admitting you have a problem is admitting that to actually making sure that what is coming out of the tanks is dollars and cents. Has it been a struggle to sort of rectify that, or has the core brands that you guys release allowed you guys to just screw around?
I think it's a balance of both.
I would agree on that. I think there was a lot of investigation before we started, so that's what allows us. I mean, people were surprised when we actually got the first beer out of here, and it was really a very good beer that people really liked. And it wasn't like there wasn't a lot of trials once we got into the market. And I think it has to do with the 6 batches per day for 2-3 years before we actually got to the market. I mean, Pete started brewing. We started brewing together at the beginning in 2013 or so. And we sold the first beer in 2016. So those 3 years show up into that. That said, we are still evolving the style of beers, and I think after a long time working together, we developed a good way of both understanding what are the good implications about making the beer as better and kind of pushing the envelope, but at the same time that pushing the envelope being kind of constrained to something that doesn't wreck the business, because it's not what we want to do. So I think we found a good balance on that. It's a balance. I'm happy with that.
So when you're creating a recipe then, Pete, where do you look for inspiration?
Anywhere and anything that smells and tastes good, basically.
Okay.
It's just what gives me an amazing experience when I consume something, and how would I translate that to a beer? Sort of, we have an arsenal of different microbes, different processes, different ingredients available, and I taste something and I go, ooh, like what was that? That was really sort of, that caused me a lot of pleasure to consume that. And how would I take sort of dimensions of that and translate into a beer, and what would be the best style? Would that best be suited in a farmhouse style, or is that a hop I can mimic some with that, or is that, some decadent chocolate coffee thing that needs to be in a stout, that kind of stuff.
And are you drawing these inspirations from food, or just individual ingredients, or other beers that you're trying?
Anything. Certainly a lot of inspiration from other beers out there. There'll be a certain dimension. I'm like, oh, what is that? That was really sort of gave me this really nice mouthfeel. Like, what caused that? And once you understand what's doing that, you can then piece that together with other things you understand to try to make a final product.
Is there a beer that you can walk us through that you've done recently that started with that brief inspiration? or that flittering inspiration, as it were?
One beer that surprised us a lot was the collab with Other Half, the Dreamwave Fluctuation, because I have not really been a big fan of lactose in hoppy beers, just because it's too sweet and like.
I don't know if you're allowed to say that these days.
Yeah, I know if I'm allowed to say it. Like my drinking profile for a fun drinking Saturday would be like 5 or 6 IPAs and then some sours and the stouts. But to me, if the beer had too much lactose in it, then I could only have one of them, and then I needed something else. And plus we're just coming out of bikini season, and I have to maintain my sexy on the beach. And so the Dreamwave Fluctuation, working with Sam, I think gave us a nice kind of balance of sort of on the lower side of lactose, where it still sort of gave that smooth kind of finish lactose does, but still maintain its drinkability. And so we used that beer recently to release like Hop Wave 2, like we did this weekend. And so that was one of the things of like, even drawing inspiration from one of our own beers of like, that really seemed to work well. Let's try it with, a different grain bill, a different fermentation profile, a different hop bill. And how does that process fit together with something we'd already done that worked well?
And the results, did you have that sort of, that final pleasing result that you were looking for?
Yeah, very pleased with Hop Wave too. Yeah.
You obviously do a lot of things with hops, and you're again. I think that there's a lot of brewers these days who are just simply adding poundage just because that's what you're supposed to do, and it's DDH, and that means something different to every little brewery. But you're actually spending a lot of time looking at the actual molecular makeup of a lot of these hops, and looking at ways different temperatures can impart different flavors. Right.
Yeah. I mean, you can make some. Going back to the 6 batches a day I did. A lot of those ended up in my bushes.
Okay.
Because you can make some pretty gross beers with lots of hops.
When you drive past that house now, are they still alive, or are they?
You probably have CTZ plants growing somewhere in my rhododendrons because we're like, let's do a 9 pound per barrel all CTZ batch and do some other things that really didn't work out well. I mean, a lot of what we learned was through negative experiments where we went, wow, this is gross. This didn't work at all. Mm-hmm. And you start learning like it's not just poundage. It's a lot of the process and how do you pull the good stuff out of hops and leave some of the more astringent, sort of overly bitter things behind in hops. And what exactly allows these kind of nice flavor profiles to end up in the glass. I mean, I think in some ways, I think about beer from reverse engineering from the glass backwards.
Yeah.
Because you kind of know what you want to start with, and then how do you get that going backwards, and that helps develop your process step.
What do you mean, what you want to end with?
Yeah, it's like when at the end of the day, with all the math models and the science and the Australian hops you can get in the world, if what you get in the glass isn't good, then you sort of failed as a brewer. And so you kind of know what you're looking for, and then how do you run that backwards to eventually you're going to pull grain out of the silo and mash in at some temperature, and it's going to pull this distribution of sugars, and then you're going to whirlpool, and polyphenols and proteins are going to bind, and all these other things are going to happen, and there's all this crazy things happens with yeast and fermentation, and that depends on temperature and pH and all these other variables. How do you put them all together to produce what you want in the glass for the person or the can?
And you're looking at that for, each and every recipe that you're doing, obviously.
Yeah, that being said, once we don't reinvent the double IPA every time we do a double IPA. So there's definitely, some things like, oh, well, this temperature profile gives this good distribution of sugar. So we don't reinvent the wheel every time.
It was interesting because in my head, it was like all the initial years, there was like this development of the main basics of the process, and what I see is that now we're tweaking portions of it. Like we have like a very long process of different things that we need to achieve and do. And that was set, and then we are now focusing on, okay, so this portion here, we can get better at extracting more out of the hops without extracting astringency because we don't like it. So how do we improve that? And so it's incremental kind of inside the whole process. And that was the good part of this was like we have like a nice process at the beginning of our experience as a big brewery.
And that comes from your homebrewing background as well, of just running trials over and over and over again.
I think so. I think a lot of figuring out how to brew beer is, I mean, having a really strong scientific background helps, but a lot of it is trial and error. Like, you can have these really great theories, these mathematical models that say do this, but then you got to try it, because brewing's so complicated. It's not like this three-dimensional problem you solve. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of dimensions into what produces a beer the way it is, and so you can focus on some, but are they the dominant things controlling the flavor? Because you may be missing something, and so you got to try it. Like, you come with a conceptual model, you try it, and then did it work? Sometimes it does, and that's great. But not always. And then it's like, well, your conceptual model's wrong. And you need to go back to the drawing board and go, what did I miss here? What is producing this one flavor here that I really like or I don't like? And how do I control that to minimize it or maximize it, depending on how it tastes?
I'm struck by the fact that, when I talk to brewers a lot of the time, it's always about, going back to what you were saying about Sean Hill, of just, like the art in some ways, where more people focus on that. And it strikes me that more often than not, for newer breweries at least, there's a little bit of a wish and a prayer that goes into each batch. From a scientific background, I can't imagine that's ever enters into your mind.
Sounds wildly irreproducible to me. But I know some people in places really do brew that way. Like, I remember talking to Dan Torres, who you mentioned before. And I'm like, oh, what pH is this? He's like, I don't really go by pH. Like, I blend until I really like the taste, and I'm done. And I'm like, well, do you know what pH is? It's like, no, I just blend it until I like it, and then I'm done.
Does that make you twitchy?
For producing here, yes. For what he gave in the glass was beautiful, and absolutely worked for him. So, I mean, and also we haven't gotten into very extended barrel aging or anything like that. We probably do need to blend to taste, but
right.
You're still gonna measure the pH.
And I'm still gonna measure the pH when we're
to get it to where you want it in your mind. But then
depending on the beer, like I definitely personally I have sort of models of like if the beer has a lot of fruit in it, I do like it a little bit more on the sour side, like pH 3.2, 3.3. If it's supposed to be this nice gentle farmhouse, I like it more 3.4, 3.5. And I know this, and that seems to consistently translate into taste to me. I mean, that's my personal palate, but but if you can't do that to control those, then I don't know how you're gonna.
Well, I think the issue on the art is that the art is a reflection of processes that have been proven by previous artists that are kind of passing to you. So it's kind of the craft idea, like where you have like an artisan that is producing something, he knows how to produce it, he delegates that knowledge to somebody. So that works because that's why he knows how to taste beer and how to blend them. And so can you have a guy in the cellar that knows exactly what Dan Suarez wants, and that's where you need to quantify things. That's where you need to kind of understand. Okay, this is the art, but this is what the scientific background of that art means. Because I mean, it's not like the art doesn't have a reason for things to be that way. Maybe they don't know why, maybe they forgot why, but they're still doing it in a certain way because it produces.
I think there's a scientific underpinning to.
Absolutely, it's like it's there. It's just trial and error of the artisan that was generating all these ideas.
Science being top of mind for both of you, obviously with your backgrounds. Where else are you applying scientific methods, scientific thoughts to the brewery?
To the brewery, I think probably everywhere. I mean,
I would say so.
But in ways that stand out from other breweries that maybe, you've been to a whole bunch. You go, you drink around a little bit. Like, where do you guys try to differentiate yourself in that arena?
Well, I mean, I think the recent thing is we are developing a mathematical model for hops, and that's the framework is done. We're dialing in parameters right now, and that's actually taught us quite a bit. We have a beer coming out called Mass Fluxes, where the model suggested we really need to pay more attention to this one flux that we really hadn't been paying attention to, and that's probably quite critical.
So I'm sure that there are people who are very smart who listen to this podcast, although Lord knows why. As a writer, numbers terrify me. So as soon as you start talking about math, I go into cold sweats in like freshman year of high school algebra, which I think I flunked.
Right.
All right. So walk us through this then, or
why would you?
Treat me like I'm a freshman in high school because that's about as limited as I am.
So a mathematical model is where you come up with a series of equations to sort of model reality. And why do you do that? You do that because if you can produce with this series of rules, it confirms you understand your system. but then it also lets you explore what's controlling your system and tells you how to refine your system.
And you guys are brewing on a 20-barrel brew house.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we had this nice breakthrough experiment that happened in literally a 750 milliliter growler that I was just messing around like, what happens when you blah, 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 and I was like, oh my God, this is freaking remarkable. And so how do you upscale that? And then we tried that a few times and we saw glimmers of what we were looking for, but then it never really made it to the can. Beer was still very nice, but it didn't really have that thing we were looking for. And so we started putting these equations together to say, well, here's what we think's happening. And then you try to measure what you can from where you can get values you want and plugging it in, and then it starts telling you about this process. And so in that sort of exercise, we learned that one of the mass fluxes in the brewing process we were not really paying attention to as much as we should.
Okay.
And that is probably really important. And so we have an experimental beer called mass fluxes where we really paid attention to that flux. And we're hoping it's going to work. It's like halfway through its life right now, but I think things are looking very promising.
Mm-hmm.
But so then we have this mathematical tool that says, if we change this in the brewing process, I mean, one thing, the math model lets you go, well, what happens if I do this? What are the predicted results without brewing a 20-barrel batch and either dumping it down the drain or having something you're not quite happy with? You also have to wait 3 weeks for the results. So we use this tool to sort of go, all right, we really want to try this next. And then that turns into an actual beer.
When do you hope to have the beer out?
Mass fluxes, I think.
2 weeks.
2 weekends.
Okay. So mid-September,
Yeah.
thereabouts. Yep. And it's an IPA?
Yes.
And what's the hops that you guys are using in there?
That one is all Citra.
All Citra. Yeah. Okay. And does it help when you have this method going to just use one varietal of hops?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we've been trying to you sort of perturb around a base so you understand all the other processes and just isolate one thing to change, one variable.
Yeah.
But you don't want to just do that because hops are different too, and so it becomes a pretty complicated thing.
Yeah.
But to isolate this one effect of changing this one mass flux, we were just sticking with one hop bill.
Okay. Makes sense. I want to switch back over to the business before we come back to the beer as well. But you guys are in the process of launching a tap room, which it strikes me as odd that you didn't originally. You cringe as I say that. Did I touch a nerve? Is that a?
No, I don't think so. No, I think it was a very clear decision that we made when we started, going through the process of making a brewery that either of us wanted to have to deal with what the tap room means. The tap room has to do with a lot more employees, a lot more hours, and it has to have some food. It has to have it's a completely different business. So we didn't want to get into the food business. We didn't know anything about it. And so it was like, okay, so we're engineers. We're coming into this other business of the brewery, which because we think we can get something that is actually a very good product and we know we can achieve the goals of making it happen. But we didn't want to stretch that into also we need to learn how to do a tap room and a restaurant and deal with this, because we didn't know.
Yeah.
And so it was like a kind of a very clear decision for us that we didn't want to get into that and we wanted to get into just having very good beer.
I mean, quite honestly, trying to open up a commercial brewery was enough for us to take on as a first step.
Sure. Yes. I mean, we were both also working on something else. I mean, so it was a lot
I'm still part-time in the consulting firm right now.
Okay.
And that ends in 2 weeks.
Oh, well, that's exciting then. That's congratulations on that.
But so that was the beginning, of okay, this is how we think about this. And then what happened now is that after almost 2 years of being in operation, we started selling beer in November. We know that now we need a tap room. I mean, we knew probably 9 months ago, we started saying, okay, we need a tap room now, and we're probably happy with what we're doing on the brewery side, that we know that we can tackle this new challenge for us, which is kind of making a tap room that is actually consistent with what we want to offer as the beer. We cannot, I mean, that's one of the key issues is that we don't want to be doing something that is not consistent with the quality of the beer we're producing, so we think it's important that if we're offering, whatever we're offering needs to be in the same par. So because of that, we didn't have it at the beginning, and now we're going to open a new location with a tap room.
I mean, we started out to go way back. You know, this is even before the Vermont trips were in full swing. We were talking about doing a production brewery for distribution.
Okay.
Like we'll just make beer and send it out. And then as we, through the many years of developing the project, we got we started waiting in lines and sort of really enjoying lines and all this stuff, but we didn't know that was going to happen when we opened. Like who knows? The whole line life thing is a whole other interview, really. And the future of that, I don't know.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, you almost have to, when you are a line life brewery, and I've spoken to the guys at Other Half and other places where this happens, and then you've seen other breweries who have been open for many years, who never had that, who are now trying to capitalize off of that. It was interesting to me that Victory down in Pennsylvania started to do Saturday morning IPA releases, thinking that they could grab some of the lightning in the bottle, and everybody just kind of shrugged. But right. I think the big thing that everybody has to look at, if you do have lines, and you guys do when you guys are open, what happens when eventually the folks who are standing there this Saturday discover another place that they're going to go to next Saturday, and you have to, be thinking towards the future.
Absolutely, and that is in part, where the tap room comes in. We right now have I don't know what it is, 800-900 square feet of parking lot that people show up at 4:30 in the morning. We never expected that.
What time do you guys get here?
Over the winter, I was getting here 5-6 a.m.
All right.
Sometimes it's just fun. but also we wanted to put out heat lamps for people there doing a bottle share. We wanted to open the door so people could come in to use the bathroom.
Yeah.
We can't set up porta potties back here for some weird reasons. But.
Okay.
And so we were doing that in the winter when it was super cold out. We didn't really expect that. So I think that our plan for the new space is to open up a back area that has some heat and some bathrooms. And is that going to serve a line community for the next 5 years? I don't know. But it should as soon as we open. And then it will be a tap room. Be a beer garden in a tap room. So as far as a line life and sustainability, I don't know. But I think that everybody should buffer against that going away, because it might. There's a lot of breweries opening.
And that also speaks to diversity in beer as well. I mean, you're saying that you're doing sours, you want to do stouts, you want to get into... are there plans beyond that? Are there beers and styles that are exciting you that you'd like to start to screw around with in case? I don't think hazy IPA or IPA in general is going away. It's here, but you never know where.
We get a lot of requests to do like a lager or pilsner, and my response has been go see Dan Suarez.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe one day once we're really happy with everything else and we have really strong barrel programs going.
I think the first thing we want to do is to we started already, but we need to kind of get very much deeper into the barrel program. We just started putting beer in barrels, and so we want to get into kind of having sours and stouts that are
like barrels right now.
And you want to grow it to what?
Sorry, what?
You want to grow? You have 8 right now. How many do you want to grow it to?
I mean, literally 8 oak barrels.
Okay,
this is our barrel.
Yeah, no, we want to grow that to. I mean, we have plans to grow that to even reach 1,000 barrels or something like that.
I mean, I think we want to at least hit a pipeline such that you're doing at least one barrel age release a month or something like that. In the distant future.
What do you look for with barrels? Are you going for new bourbon? Old? What?
I mean, right now for the bourbon barrels, we have a good relationship with Hill Rock Distilleries, and that started with we took a tour, we got to know them. They really liked our beer, so we bring the beer when we go, and
that helps.
Their bourbon is amazing, and their whole process, their ethics, their philosophy is sort of in line with ours, and so we started working with them and just picking up a few barrels at a time, and we haven't put them in a bottle yet, but we really like the way they do things and the quality of the bourbon, so we figured it would blend really well with the stouts we're making.
You just brought up 2 really interesting words that I don't hear as often as I'd like, ethics and philosophy. What do you see as Equilibrium's philosophy?
I mean, just to tap off the Hill Rock thing, they're doing things that even I wish we were doing that we can't. But they own 100 acres. They're growing their own malt. It's I think sustainability is a big one. They're working really well with with their local communities, and I think that's something that we've really tried to do quite a bit as well. I mean, it comes from just a personal preference, but also from eventually when these line lights go away, you're going to be stuck with your. I believe the future of beer at these smaller scales is there's going to be more breweries, no pun intended, in equilibrium with their local community. Because that's what happened in Europe, and they didn't get hit with Prohibition.
Right.
And so that Prohibition kind of reset things in the U.S.
Hands down.
And so I think more and more it's going to be interaction with your local community. And so, right now we're in a bit of a position where you can do stuff with the beer, and it's influencing cash flows. It's helping other businesses. It's helping other places get started. It's we hope to try to help make Middletown a destination location. And that sort of stems from philosophy. Like, you could mass produce empty squared at 100,000 barrels and try to flood all over the world, but it's not something we want to do. I mean, there's enough beer going all over the world right now. And so it's a little bit of pride in the product and also working with your local community, I think. And then trying to use some of that, I don't know if power is the right word, but some of the position you're in to do some good with it.
Yeah, the influence. Yeah.
Yeah, like we try to do a lot of sort of charity causes and raffles for whatever kind of happens to come across our plate, and try to use our influence to do some good for people in the community.
But where does ethics come in? Because I mean, this is when people talk about the alcohol industry overall, I mean, there's a lot of skullduggery, and there's a lot of even among smaller craft players these days. It's the store shelves aren't getting any bigger. There's bars aren't adding more tap handles. There's the business side of things can be a fairly cutthroat, as it were. So for you to bring up ethics, I think is wonderful. But where do you see a brewery's ethical responsibilities, like first and foremost?
I mean, I think that depends on kind of the dimensions of ethics that we're talking about. But I think trying to make a sustainable product and sourcing locally, I think is important. And then trying to use that product to help better your community versus maximize profit is an important dimension. And there's give and play in all these areas, because sometimes we would love to use a malt grower 10 minutes away, but we can't. It's just not feasible, and so we have to source not locally. But I think that's the trend right now. That's transitioning, where the malt, for example, in New York is getting better and better. It's getting more affordable, and then when it makes sense, we could start doing that more and more. I know a couple other places like Plain D's have been doing that for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's more maltsters coming online. New York has a farm brewer's license, which I think by 2019. Brewers are going to be required 90% of their beers have to be made with all New York State ingredients. So there's definitely a good outlet for
not including water. Not
including water.
Well, you can't go. My beer is 90% by mass New York water. We're good.
That would have been a fun loophole. That's you talked about sustainability, but you both come from environmental backgrounds as well, and I think that as much as people talk about flavor and process and science of beer, there are great environmental impacts. I mean, brewing beer uses a lot of water. Not all of it leaves the brewery clean. There are concerns of climate change these days affecting how the ingredients are grown and the ability for them to be sustainable in the long term. Packaging and everything else that comes with it. You guys obviously have unique standpoints in coming from environmental science and environmental sciences background. Where do you think we, the consumers, should be thinking or putting our attention when it comes to environmental issues and what can we be doing to...
With beer stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that a lot of it is on education, but for example, one thing we did really simple through the Ronald McDonald House is people just, recycle your pack tech, recycle your cans, but you can bring back your aluminum tabs on top of cans, and we collect them here, and then working with Ronald McDonald House, they turn that back into charity donations. And so it's just real simple things. Just be aware. Don't go out and throw your cans all over a stream or something like that. Keep them with you, recycle them.
But then, obviously, in the brew house, though, I mean, where are you guys putting your environmental backgrounds to good work?
Oh, with reducing
I don't think, regretfully, at the scale we are. I mean, it gets into a really tricky media. I mean, I was looking into options to begin with because it was part of the background. I was looking into options of kind of recapturing CO2. However, the amount of issues like using fermentation, you produce a lot of CO2 that's vented.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but the issue with that CO2 is that it's not pure. It has a lot of bacteria or whatever it's in your kind of a farmhouse. It will have bacteria. It will have yeast. It will have so you need to actually have a machinery for cleaning it, and it was more expensive. To clean it, but for the production we do here, to have the machinery to clean it and the energy to clean it, that was more expensive than the CO2. So,
there's only a very few breweries that actually recapture CO2.
It is very hard to do. So that's one of
yeah.
the things that you think about. Then the other thing is trying to be efficient with the energy. We're trying to be as efficient as possible. I mean, most breweries also have the capabilities on the size we are. I mean, granted, also we are minimal. On the size of these. I mean, these look big for somebody who is not used to breweries, but
sure.
For the size of a brewery, we're kind of in the lower, end of production. And so what we do is we try to reuse the heat that we generate on kind of cooling things, and then we use that hot water again. We kind of heat water and then we recuperate that water and then we use it.
Yeah.
So those kind of things that we try to do. But that is about that. Of course, the spent grain goes into farmers,
sure.
which is kind of being used for dairy farms and whatnot. So that's kind of a no-brainer here in this area where we are. There's a lot of possibilities to do that.
I mean, I think a little bit on some other lines too. We try to keep a good eye on kind of nice packaging. So there's some places that makes PacTech out of recycled grain.
Mm-hmm.
And in things like that. And I think those products are kind of almost there, but not quite.
Yeah.
So we can't have PacTech that if it sits in a cooler full of ice, disintegrates.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not quite ready for prime time, in our opinion. But I think stuff like that is probably going to happen and come around. And so when that does, I would encourage the consumers to keep an open mind about it.
Sure. Because you'll have an open mind about it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is stuff that yeah.
Absolutely.
But if we take it and it puts it in the cooler in an hour, it's
That's how you work.
Oh yeah, it's fish food, right? I mean, there's those ones that were going to come out a couple of years ago, the disintegrating rings that you could throw into the ocean, and
you can't disintegrate in the time scale of an hour or two.
Right, exactly, yeah. Carlsberg tried doing a wooden bottle or a pulp bottle a couple of years ago that had a 6-month shelf life, but some of the reports that were coming in were towards the end of that 6 months, it tasted like wood pulp, and you could do your Incredible Hulk and crush it in your hand.
So I think those things are really cool, and I have high hopes for them, and we'd certainly incorporate them when they make sense. But they're not quite ready for prime time, I don't think.
One of the questions I've been asking folks, and as we start to wrap up here, what's your hope for beer?
My hope for beer?
Yeah.
I actually sort of like where I said I think it's going to go, where it becomes sort of a sustainable balance with your local community, and it becomes not just a product but an experience where it gives people a reason to go out and get together and socialize. And one of the things I always loved about Vermont is the minimal TV scenes, and people were talking and engaging and talking about their lives and their issues and enjoying each other's company.
Not constantly going into Untapped and
it's not like this the cell phone life, which I think is sort of strange.
Takes you out of the beer moment.
Yeah.
What I see about
what a hope for beer,
for the beer industry,
or in general. I leave it open to everybody's own interpretation.
I'm thinking about just kind of having a nice beer to drink.
I wish.
I'm right
That's
there.
my hope for beer.
I hope to have one right now.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think in the beer industry we're kind of in a nice, very interesting place where this is evolving into a completely different country, like Pete was saying, on on people having locally sourced beers that they're fond of, and you have like many local places that you can go, and people are just patronizing their own local stuff. I think that is a great thing, and I think the interaction with the community is interesting. It's a way of making beer something that is more connected to the public. Before, to me, like a kind of big beer was just the producer, and they were like generating something that people were consuming. And now the experience is what matters. I mean, it's actually the local aspects of it. The fact that a lot of people know us. I mean, like our clients actually know who we are, and I think that is interesting. And it has a completely different set. And also, you go to Pennsylvania and you find the same thing with the local brewery there, And so that is kind of the relationship that I think is going into. And I hope that kind of doesn't get prevented by some of the forces that could be important, and tend to confuse what's about the craft beer and what's about the big beer.
Oh, the fake craft beer.
I mean, there is some of that. I wanted to say,
or even some of the bad craft beer that's out there these days as well.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that will sort out itself. I think that doesn't have as long as it doesn't have any. I mean, it's just a guy trying to make some beer and it's not very good. That's honest. I mean, okay, I'm not doing a very good job, but it's honest. The other things are not. I mean, I think that's kind of one of the things I hope people start realizing. I think there's a lot of fight back going into what's big beer and what their interests are, and versus kind of a small craft breweries, because even the kind of the American brands are not American anymore.
Mm-hmm. That's also true. Ricardo Petroni, Peter Oates, co-founders of Equilibrium Brewing here in New York's Hudson Valley. Thanks so much for sitting down and talking beer with me.
Oh, thanks for coming up.
Thank you. Yep.
And you guys should definitely check them out online. It's eqbrew.com. And the line forms as early as 4:30 on can release days. So get here early, stake out your spot with your chair, and definitely get some good beer. If you have questions for me, guests you'd like to hear, questions or topics you'd like addressed on the program, you can reach out to me at John Hall, it's JOHNHOLL at beerandbrewing.com. You can also go to beerandbrewing.com, where you can read all about homebrewing, the craft beer scene, and find recipes and more. While there, you can also subscribe to the magazine. Please subscribe to the magazine and reach out and join the conversation on Twitter at John_Hall. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode. Thanks again for listening. And guys, thanks so much.
Yep.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Cheers.
This episode has been brought to you by the American Homebrewers Association, the country's only not-for-profit membership organization dedicated to promoting the community of homebrewers and empowering homebrewers to make the best beer in the world. Brew with the AHA at homebrewersassociation.org, and remember, relax, don't worry, have a homebrew. This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com, or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.